Before I start, if you're confused by the fact that I'm wearing sunglasses, long story short, the day before this video was recorded, I had a long work day, and I was in the sun for 12 plus hours, and I burn very easily. So not only am I burnt right now, which you can probably see from my skin, despite not wearing sunglasses during work, I have these pale circles around my eyes. I look like some kind of inverted raccoon, so I'll be covering up my head and eyes for the foreseeable future, specifically as long as my sunburn is super prominent. But anyway, I want to talk about this little movie that I'm going to see in a few hours, Child's Play. Child's Play is the latest horror remake of a classic franchise which focuses on a more modern take of the iconic killer doll Chucky. And for those of you who are familiar with the original 1988 classic film, and keep in mind there will be spoilers for the original if you haven't seen that one already, this movie seems to be following similar beats to the first one with a couple of diversions in there. I mean, there's a boy named Andy who lives with his single mother, and the mother gets him a doll to cheer him up. That part, for the most part, is the same, other than the fact that in this movie, Andy is 13 years old rather than 6 years old, which is probably a lot better from a narrative standpoint, a lot easier from an acting standpoint, but we'll see. And then where the film truly diverts from the source material is that this time Chucky is not possessed by the soul of a serial killer thanks to a voodoo ritual, no. This seems like an AI gone bad kind of movie, which we've seen a lot of recently. I'm not a huge fan of the Chucky franchise, and I don't think that the original movie is a classic like a lot of people say it is. I think it's a fun little horror movie that's primarily elevated by an interesting concept on interesting twist on the slasher genre, as well as Brad Dourif's performance as Chucky, which in itself is iconic. And the film was successful enough to bring about a franchise of mediocre to terrible films, most of which I still haven't even seen. I've seen the original, parts of Child's Play 3, I've seen The Bride of Chucky almost all the way through, which that movie's just really weird, and then Seed of Chucky, which was weird and extremely terrible. And I still haven't seen those two straight-to-VOD movies, Curse of Chucky or Cult of Chucky, although I have heard limited but fairly good things about those two movies. And this remake has now made history because it is a reboot, but usually, no, more like always. When a remake or a reboot is done, that's because the franchise or film has been out of the public consciousness for a while. Maybe it had been a while since the last film, or it had been plagued by so many bad films to the point where the only logical conclusion was to start from scratch from everything, was just to, take all that out of canon and just start over, or at least try to. But this movie is coming at a strange time, a time when the original franchise is still going. Hell, right now they're in the middle of developing a new Child's Play TV show, and it's a continuation of the Brad Dourif version of Chucky, and he's even returning to portray Chucky. So really, I don't understand why this remake needs to happen, or really needed to happen. But I shall go in with an open mind, and even though I have enjoyed the trailers thus far for the 2019 Child's Play, I'm going in with low expectations and just hoping that it's good. Now, before I actually transition into the actual review on the film, I want to throw out my normal disclaimer for the uninitiated. The way that I convey my thoughts on a film is through a pro and con list. It helps me to best catalog the good and the bad, in my opinion. And while I try to keep the sections separate, if I can make a pro and con work off of each other, or maybe if they're intrinsically tied together, then I'll take advantage of that. And also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It helps out the channel a lot. Anyway, there's your disclaimer and reminder to subscribe. I'll see you guys shortly with my thoughts on the 2019 remake of Child's Play.
At Caslin, we believe that happiness is about more than entertainment. It's about being known, understood, loved. Introducing your new best friend.
People, let me tell you about my best friend.
As far as the performances go, I thought that the main three, Aubrey Plaza, Tyler Henry, and Gabriel Bateman, gave really good performances. It took me a little bit to get into Plaza's Karen, as she seemed to at first be doing a bit of an impression of her Parks and Rec character, April Ludgate, but she was soon able to make this character stand out from that box, and Brian Tyler Henry was the primary comedic mainstay and kept showcasing his reasons for staying, but not necessarily for his character staying. And then as for Bateman himself, his Andy had to show off a wide range of emotions, and Bateman pulled off each individual scene, shining especially whenever moments were at their breaking points. Mark Hamill himself is obviously no stranger to voice acting, and he sells the audience on his new version of Chucky and gives a very good vocal performance. I was originally worried, since in the trailers it just sounded like Mark Hamill, just doing his own voice. It rarely, despite that, it rarely distracted from the performance itself. That being said, that's where the majority of Chucky's positives end. The appearance of the doll itself is extremely terrible, particularly in the face. When we're introduced to the Buddy doll, which is what they're called in this movie, they're not called good guys, they're just called Buddy dolls. When we're first introduced to this doll, which is in the first 30 seconds of the film, you can decide then and there if the design works for you. And, well, in the showtime that I was in the theater, it seemed like it didn't really work for the vast majority of the people in there, and I know it didn't work for me. And despite the praise that I give the filmmakers for primarily utilizing a practical puppet in every scene possible, they should have just settled on maybe a less cringy design. A design that is naturally creepy is good, but I don't remember being this put off by the 1988 version. As far as where the primary entertainment value comes from, that would be from the film's third and final act, when everything starts to go tits up, really, and we get some gory, sometimes hilarious, but for the most part, memorable death scenes. The rest of the film, however, comes out with a much different tone. Sure, there are a couple of precursor scenes that suggest what will come about later, but for the most part, it's primarily a dark comedy rather than a slasher movie with comedic elements. The film is fraught with tonal inconsistencies, wanting to be a comedy and to also try and redo what It Chapter 1 did with a group of teenagers leading the way. The tonal inconsistencies play a factor in the film's pacing as well, which is very hit and miss, but mostly miss in the first two acts, unless there's something legitimately happening that shows Chucky either getting close to being, or to becoming a slasher killer, or basically just being one. And speaking of the group of teenagers that I mentioned earlier, aside from protagonist Andy, every supporting teenager character is brought down by bad performances, and the fact that these characters are written into well-recognized stereotypes, making it impossible to care about them, differentiate them from many other characters that have come before in these horror movies that like to put a focus on the idea of like a Stranger Things or an It Chapter 1 thing. And, it's just hard to pay attention to them when they're on screen and Andy is nowhere to be found. The script itself doesn't do any favors for Child's Play. There's some very poor dialogue throughout that just don't do their respective performers any good, especially with Chucky's lines, and I felt that they really had to pass over logical conclusions in order to get Chucky to actually become a killer. There were some explanations and steps that did make sense, but the full transformation never felt earned. Like, for instance, we had a good concept for the world building with this Amazon-like and Uber-like company, Caslin Products, which seems to pretty much make every product on the planet Earth at this point, and it never feels reasoned, but rather just a reason to explain that Chucky is able to accomplish certain things late in the film. And those are my thoughts on the 2019 remake of Child's Play. Really, I was entertained enough to where I didn't think it was a complete waste of time, but I do wish it had been better. And walking out of the theater once the credits started rolling, I had a consistent thought in my mind between then and when we went to see our second movie of the night. If this was just an original story, if it had nothing to do with the IP of Child's Play, and it was just a movie that was inspired in some way by Child's Play, it probably would have been a better movie. But, I don't know, and it probably would have just had a more lasting impact, but regardless, I do think it was an okay movie, and if any aspect of it made you interested in watching it, go ahead. I do recommend that you see it, just, I'm not really pushing for it, and me personally, most likely I won't be going back to see the movie anytime soon. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't hesitate to hit that like button. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so that you can keep up to date with everything that's going on the channel, and also to just help support the channel. And also, don't forget to go down in the comment section down below and just to keep the conversation going on. I really love seeing what you guys think about the movies and topics that I discuss in my videos. And now all that's left to say, I get tongue-tied in this part, but all that's left to say now is farewell until the next video, all you casual moviegoers and movie fans alike, and keep on being awesome.